Good morning. My name is Dr. Richard Bernardo. I am the editor-in-chief of the Scope Journal of for Leadership and Instruction, and I'm very pleased to be able to be the person who runs these Scope podcasts through about the Journal for Leadership and Instruction's most recent articles. The Scope Journal has been around for, I think, about 15 years or so, and it's been listed with EBSCO and as well as with ERIC, and is recognized by both of them and listed in all around the world as far as articles that it has endorsed for publication and used for research here, there, and everywhere, I'm pleased to say. And what we try to do here is extend that and all sorts of different kinds of ways, and quite frankly, to promote engagement. So along about a year ago, what we decided to do was to add in a podcast element. I would like to, I'm not sure if it's fair to say, but I am not aware of any other journals that supplement their actual print journal with podcasts, which isn't to say that they don't, but I'm not aware of any. So we're kind of pleased that we are certainly a part of probably a growing movement, given how the world is evolving technologically, whether we like it or not. But my real piece in terms of the podcast is to promote engagement. When you're going to participate in your own way by hearing what Drs. Eckhart and Craig are going to speak about, you will hear that you'll certainly be motivated to respond in some way or another to hear the points that they're making, which I think are really intriguing. I have to say, this particular article has many dimensions to it, and we're not sure where this conversation is going to go, which is fine. And so let me give them a chance to talk, because I'm talking too much. Dr. Eckhart?
Just a brief introduction?
Sure.
Sure. Okay. I'm Trish Eckhart. I'm an associate professor at Malloy University, and I teach in our undergraduate and graduate program. I teach pre-service teachers, and mostly my specialty is literacy instruction, but I also teach instructional strategies and theory.
Thank you. Dr. Craig?
Hi, I'm Madeline Craig. I also teach at Malloy University, both undergrad and graduate classes. I also have a specific role of helping our faculty incorporate technology into their courses, as well as helping our teacher candidates incorporate technology into their lessons. I have a real interest and passion in technology, and also a real interest in writing skills, building students' writing skills. And so that, I mean, we could talk hours and hours about how writing skills might change now with the addition of AI, and that's what I've been actually looking at this summer.
Well, we could have a whole conversation about that. Again, I'm not sure if you read that other article I talked to before the class, we began talking, but that article's already 90 years old. It only came out 2 months ago as such. And they freely admitted that as such as well. So, but what you really did here was with this particular, we're calling it a from the field, but that's how we used it in the journal. But I have to say, this is a terrific example of research from all kinds of corners. And what I wanted to do is preface that by pointing out something I know each of you will likely point out in a moment better than I will, is that the COVID epidemic, what with all of the consequences, unintended futures, unrecognized futures, and I have strong opinions about whether we should have had as many unrecognized futures as we have had connected to it. In some respects, they were all very obvious to us, and to others, they're not. But the SEL issue, social and emotional learning, impact, or the impact of COVID on SEL needs. I'm talking to myself for a moment by saying I'm not sure I particularly recognize the depth of it as such with higher education students, certainly with elementary and high school students, but not necessarily with SEL students. I also say that one of my own relatives dropped out of college because he just couldn't deal with the online piece when that began. It just wouldn't work for him, and he just the other day was telling me that he's glad he's going back to college. He took 2 years off because it's life. And yet he certainly had some issues that I'm sure that we all have had insofar as what the COVID thing is all about. But that's what you saw. You saw it. And let's talk about the genesis of how this project and this research began.
Sure. Well, we just noticed a shift in our students when, when everybody was kind of coming out of COVID and so forth. And, we were hearing students say that they were feeling overwhelmed. We noticed that some of our classes that usually were, they're small class sizes, and usually there's a lot of productive academic discourse and peer-to-peer discussion and so forth. We noticed that our students were quiet in a lot of them, and it was really challenging in a way that I had never seen before, to get students to talk to each other. And so, there were many different situations that arose, but one in particular that really stood out to me was every semester in the Foundations of Education class, students are required to give a research presentation about their paper that they've been researching all semester and so forth. And by the time they usually get to the presentation part, right, they know it inside and out because they've written their paper and it's been revised and it's been peer edited, on and on and on. And so I believe I had 18 students in class, and everybody was required to come prepared to present that day. And 8 students showed up, and then 1 student showed up out of the 8 and left. And so when we finally all, reconvened again and we had a discussion, the students just said that they were nervous to speak in front of people, and that they were nervous to stand up in front of a class. And so that was just a shift that I hadn't seen before. And so at that point, I remember going to Madeline and saying, "Oh my gosh, this just happened." And she'll share her account as well, and so forth. And that was when I said, okay, wait a minute, before we can even dive into the academics, we also have to address the social and emotional component of our students, which, right, is a skill within itself for prospective teachers to take into the field and to learn and to be able to utilize as well.
Right. And I was seeing the same kind of thing. So Trish came together. We both teach the same class, but I was seeing it in a different lens for the group project. So, part of our study is based on this using project-based learning in the class. So they do a project that extends all 14 weeks. And, we've done it for a couple of years now. Trish and I have published other articles about it and all the revisions that we've done over the years based on feedback. But there was a different type of anxiety when it came to like working with others that we hadn't seen before. Really like just concerns about who was in their group and managing their time and trying to work with others to complete a task. And that one semester, I must have gotten, tons more like emails and wanting to have conversations with me about how to work with others. And so we were both seeing this kind of shift after COVID, and we thought we've got to do something. And that was kind of the impetus for the study and the idea of looking specifically at social emotional learning and how they can work with others, manage their own selves and that sort of thing. So that's why we started the study.
I mean, obviously you saw the need, and you diagnosed it on the fly in a certain sense, and accurately, and then moved towards a premise.
Not on the fly. It took a semester for us to.
Okay.
And I have to say also that, Madeline said the intentional SEL instruction. So, at that moment, I was like, wait a minute, we need to do something for students and so forth. And Madeline's the one who brought in this intentional focus, not just embedding SEL into what we're doing, but specifically saying to the students, this is what we're going to work on, and here's how we're hoping to approach it. So it was the intentional piece that I think was really powerful and important as well.
Yeah, some people just use like mood meters. Let's check in with our classes in the beginning. But because we're teaching future teachers and we want them to know and understand the why behind the strategies that we're using, we decided to, really focus on this word intentional. And we told them, and everything was very deliberate in terms of this study and for them understanding why we were doing it and what was our outcome.
From an organizational leadership lens, just for a moment, I've been part of it. I'm doing this for a long time, before either of you were born, kind of time length. And you often will hear, both in the K-12 world as well as the higher education world, that, well, we need to teach more X, or we need to intentionally do more of Y and Z. And then the first thing people will say, well, where do I fit it into my curriculum? I don't know how we do this after all, and the usual kind of objections. And a way that some people will evade the actual intent is to say, well, I'll address it as it comes up. It becomes my way, if organically, I guess is the better word to use, I'll deal with it. But if it isn't about, if I'm not talking about the War of 1812, and suddenly the War of 1812 comes up, I'll find a way to squeeze it into the, even though I'm teaching the Vietnam War as such. And SEL strikes me that way to some extent. Sat in and chaired quite a few dissertations over the past several years with assistant superintendents, again in the K-12 realm, who sort of came up with the premise that if you just train teachers to be aware of it, you can address the issues as they arise. And there were a couple of others who come back to where you're coming from, is on the higher education plane. You say it has to be intentional. You have to build it into the structure of what you're doing to clearly bring it to the next place. That makes sense?
Yeah, and you see a lot in, K-12 has been using, before it was even called CEL, it was character development and all different kind of terms for how we help, our students become the people that they are. But we felt like there was that intentional need within, especially a teacher education program. And Trish and I have talked about even extending this to like other disciplines in the college to do this kind of intentional CEL work in their own classes. But yeah, it was a little unique. And even when we started talking about it, we're like, well, quite honestly, like, what's how are we defining CEL? Because everyone defines it in different ways. And that's where we pulled from the Castle research, because we found a lot of districts were using, Castle's definition. And that was very specific in terms of, these abilities to help young people, or all people, right? We're not talking about kindergartners here. We're talking about 18, 19-year-olds who still need to kind of learn how to develop their own healthy identities, manage their emotions, create collective goals, empathize with others, and work together. And so we pulled from the Castle research as kind of like the framework for ours.
Yeah. You also had, Dr. Eckhart, I'm leaving you out for the moment. You want to add to that, or?
No. Madeline said it perfectly.
Well, you also had a variety of interventions that you put together here, and the chief one being the PBL piece. You want to explain how you pulled what that was about, so we can draw some more points out of that?
Sure. So every semester, our students engage in it's a semester-long project-based learning activity. And they're asked a specific question, which is, how can we improve schools to better meet the needs of a diverse population of 21st century learners? And that's the essential question that guides the project. And we have students are given, they know what their expectations are. They have a rubric. There's various different topics, units of study throughout the semester that we address that need to be covered in their design a school, such as governance, technology, diversity, and so forth. And so they're required to work in a group to create this school. Everything needs to be research-based and so forth. And it's, in the beginning, students they're engaged in this productive struggle, trying to figure out how to answer a question, how to make everything work, because we're not telling them what they need to do. And I do have, so we use the gold, am I freezing? Is that?
No.
No? Okay. It was glitching a little bit. So when we designed our project, we use the gold standard model for project-based learning. And that's from the Buck Institute for Education. And if anybody's interested in learning more about project-based learning, what is the website? Oh, PBL Works. I highly recommend that. There's research on there, there's sample lessons and so forth. But so we looked at the research and we said, you know what? We want students to be active learners. We want them to be engaged in inquiry-based learning. We want them to be engaged in productive academic struggle. And so we just started really doing research about PBL and put together this project, which evolved. It originally started as just, one component in the semester, and it turned into a whole semester long unit, which then also, considering pre-service teachers, then we're hoping that by them engaging in this instructional approach, that then maybe they can use it in their own classrooms as well.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen.
And the ultimate outcome is them building a website too. So within that, they learn kind of technology skills. They create a Google site and they have to build it throughout the semester. And we are there to give them feedback, which is so great with any of the Google products. We can give them feedback along the way around making adjustments as they're building the website. And they wind up having like a page for each one of our units. And ultimately, what we're asking them to do is take what you're learning about this content and how would you translate that to improving schools for the better, basically, for our 21st century diverse learners. And so they're looking at, say, like the history of education from a very different lens than they had been before we started this project.
And the SEL piece was not just like, oh, today we're learning about SEL, or it was threaded throughout on an interdisciplinary basis.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Go ahead, Trish.
No, that's okay. Just, yes, it was, that's where we started to look at the 5 competencies
Yes.
In the SEL framework, and really talk about how those competencies are used in this project-based activity where they're collaborating with peers and they're engaged in, self-awareness and so forth, and time management and so forth.
And you backed in activities to support those premises.
Mm-hmm.
That's really noble, more than noble. It's just it's interesting and great at the same time. But what you also did, and it goes back to the N on my chest for nerd, is you also built in a way to study the effectiveness of what you did. And you use a design model. I am going to confess, and don't tell anybody I said this, even though this is going to go out to the Western world. You called it hypothesis generating research design. Interesting. Don't tell anybody. I never heard of that design, but I understand what it is, but I never heard of a term that way. And I think it's terrific. When you want to just help the viewers understand what that's about.
Sure. It's not, we're not testing a hypothesis, right? We're generating it. So we're looking at, there's an abundance of data everywhere all around us. So we're first, looking at our data, and we're looking for emerging themes, and we're coding our data. And then from there, we start to see, what patterns are developing, and what hypotheses have been generated. So it's not testing, it's more looking at our qualitative or quantitative data and so forth, and then pulling from that, what do we see? What's been generated?
Yeah, I'm laughing at myself because now I understand what you're saying. I understand. It's phenomenological approaches, yeah, and it's clearly was the only way to roll. But what you did say in the beginning was, or somewhere, that you for a moment did concentrate on a quantitative and a qualitative approach, but you saw that the quantitative told you what, but the qualitative told you why.
Exactly. Yeah. So our design was really throughout the semester, we built in the Castle 5, they call them. So those are the 5, say, competencies that Castle kind of relates specifically to SEL, self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. And so each week, Castle has these great videos. So we showed the video, and they're very cartoonish, almost like elementary, which we felt like it was fine because we do have some elementary educators and secondary. And then we had discussions with them about what that meant to them specifically, how they felt they performed in that. Like, would they need to improve, or was this something that they felt like they were competent in? And then we had them discuss like how it related to the project that they were working on. And some lend itself very well, especially if they were struggling, say, with responsible decision making in their groups at that time. We were able to have those like real class discussions about what that means and how can you address these difficulties. I mean, we know when they get into the field, they're they're a teacher in their own classroom, but they're still working with others. A lot of work goes into, working across grade levels with other teachers, working with administrators. And it is still an important skill that they have to have, even though some of them think they're isolated in their own classroom and they, can make decisions on their own. They really do need to make decisions with others. So the design allowed for that. And then after we had those discussions, that's when the survey went out to them, and they answered specifically, individually, how they felt personally. Like, am I good at this? Do I need to improve in this? And then we did the same thing at the end with the final reflective survey as well. So that gave us, a lot of the quantitative, but we really got a lot from this final reflective paper, where they could elaborate specifically on kind of how the process went for them, and then how it related to the cell competencies. And they even identified which ones they felt like they did really well in, and ones that they certainly could use to improve over time.
Yeah, and the magic word to use, I think, is reflective. I have some opinions about this, not necessarily grounded in any research, more nearly my own experiences, I guess. But I don't know if we ought necessarily honor and or give the opportunity to college students to truly offer their reflections. And I sometimes wonder whether we really ignore that muscle. It's probably a bad metaphor, but ignore that muscle in terms of how they're going to take all of this, the SUM of the skills of becoming and competencies and dispositions of becoming an excellent teacher out to the real world when they go meet real kids all the time. Reflection is a difficult thing to do. I think I mentioned before we talked another day that a book I always push on my students called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, who was a Nobel Prize winner in economics. I'm still reading the book. It takes me a couple of years to get through it because it's kind of a complex book. But he basically says there's two ways to think: to think fast and to think slow. And if I say to you, how much is 2 + 2? You say it's 4. You don't need a lot of time to think about that. But if you say, why is 2 + 2? Or is it possible 2 + 2 is not 4? That's when your hair starts to hurt. And you have to really consider the whys and wherefores and the whys behind that point of view. And so most people will avoid it because it's difficult. It's harder to do than not. And so if I was teaching a lesson of any sort, 2 years from now, let's say they graduated and now they have a 4th grade class in a school district, and they're teaching any kind of lesson. Forget the SEL for a moment. There's a tendency sometimes, I think, for teachers to skip over whether the reflection piece to recognize whether the lesson has worked well or not, because they're too busy moving on to the next goal and objective as such. Reflection is a difficult thing to do, and I don't know if even leadership in K-12 world or in higher education necessarily puts the kind of accent that it properly deserves. That's a long-winded statement. I know you can agree with me or not. So you want to hear
No, it's an important point. And what you just said makes me think of our methods classes. And in all of our methods classes, we ask, the students they have to write an extensive Malloy lesson plan. And then we ask them, after they've written the lesson plan and they've taught the lesson, to take a moment and to write a reflective paper about, what worked, what didn't work, what could we have done better, and so forth.
Yeah, I'm thinking of a war story. I never done this in a podcast before. I think of a quick war story. I was told I should be observing a given social studies teacher way back who was having problems and admitted to it. He was clear on that. He knew he was having some problems. So I go in to observe him, and I shouldn't be laughing. And he's teaching about the Greek columns, the different kinds of Greek columns. And the kids were just reading from the text, and he was asking them questions about the paragraphs they were just reading. And everybody was kind of drooling on the desk at that point. It wasn't really a real effective lesson. So at the end of the lesson, I said to him, so your goal was to be able to differentiate between among the different kinds of Greek columns. And he looked at me for 5 seconds. It felt like 5 years. He said, yeah, that was my goal. He didn't have a goal, but that was as close to a goal as he was going to have. So I said, well, how would you know whether they can differentiate among the columns? And he looked at me for 10 seconds and said, well, I'm going to give a test in 2 weeks. I said, on the Greek columns or on, oh no, all about the Greeks. I said, so it's going to be a one question on the test somewhere? And he said, yeah. He says, wait a minute, are you telling me I should reflect on I should evaluate every lesson? I said, yeah, I kind of am. And it never occurred to him. Now, that's not his fault. In my view, that's about how he was developed to become a certified teacher. It's fault. That's a higher education fault, and that's also the fault of the K-12 system that allowed him to not ask those kinds of questions. Now, if you bring it back to SEL, well, how do you bring that back to SEL? You do it by way of the reflective papers, which is not the kind of thing you can necessarily do multiple choice questions about.
Right. And I mean, I say the papers, but there's discussion and there's, small group work and so forth all around reflection and being a reflective practitioner and what it means.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I'm thinking more about what you're saying. And I remember in my doctoral program, every time after we wrote any paper, we had to identify 2 assumptions that we made in what we were writing. And it was just always an interesting activity for me personally, because it does get to that like deeper level thinking to be like, oh, okay, so when I wrote this I was really making assumptions about this, this particular point or that kind of thing. So, but yes, I mean, our study was really based on the whole idea of reflection. I mean, the idea of using the word intentional was, we have to stop, we have to pause and be intentional about our practice and show our students that we're doing it. Now, it took Trish and I a lot more time in our class. That took away from content, right? And someone might argue,
Yes.
The content is more important than this. But for us, and especially teaching future teachers, we want them to be reflective practitioners. We talk about that all the time. Trish and I consciously, every semester after this PBL course is done, we sit down and we say, okay, what are we going to change? We wrote an entire article called Recursive Redesign, where we talk about how many changes we've made since we started the project in 2017, just based on student feedback, based on our own notes, based on our own, experience with the project and our students. And, we know the students change too. They changed after COVID. We have to adjust. So now we include, SEL every semester, in terms of just trying to understand where they're coming from and help them build those skills that maybe they don't have that we assumed that they had, So, I mean, we also, I think Trish has taught me about the visible thinking routines, Trish, from Project Zero. We use these in our classes all the time because we want to see how our students are thinking about a particular topic. But in this study, it was us. We want to see how our students are thinking about incorporating things like responsible decision making and self-management and things like that. So we are trying to almost get inside their heads, make them start to reflect and understand why they do what they do, and then kind of pull it out in the study. And that's, I think, and just to go back, full circle here, I think that's why the qualitative data was so much more important for us than the quantitative, trying to get inside their heads and understand how they're thinking.
And to roll back for a moment, and that's not the right verb, but it's the first thing I can think of, to roll back to the strategy, the overall strategy that you use, PBL, is an experiential strategy where people are co-generating. Was co or singular? I forget. I'm not sure if I remember that.
No, they're collaborating.
Yeah, it's the collaborate. Obviously more than one person, to inquire with each other, reflect as they move along, hopefully listen to each other, which is another skill that often gets lost in the wash, especially when we were all scattered to our laptops. To make that a part of the learning culture, their own internal learning culture, if there is such a thing.
Yeah. And I'm just thinking about one of the changes that we also incorporated was this idea of design thinking. And so the first phase of this project is to empathize. And we hadn't done it the first couple semesters, but we thought, why aren't we asking them to ask teachers in the field, what would they change? Like, how would they design a school? And incorporate, of course, we're trying to keep it to our content units. We're not, saying go out there and rebuild everything about a school, but specific to. And so the first assignment is that they interview a teacher and they get to pick. We don't care if it's mom, dad, cousin. You want to get their perspective on how would they change schools, and then they share that with one another within their groups to first understand the teachers who are in the field and what they would adjust to make changes. And then we build on that with like teaching them, say, different curriculum items like working with diverse learners and history of education. But we first start with that empathy piece, empathizing with the people who are in these positions right now and what their challenges are. And, you can imagine after COVID, a lot of those conversations related to the COVID struggles, but we're starting to see a little bit of a shift now in the interviews last semester, that all the teachers aren't just talking about, COVID anymore.
Well, a different lily pad in the same pond is my own experiences is on the leadership certificate level instruction is I just finished reading some papers last night, and it just surprises me. Well, no, it doesn't really surprise me. Is the passivity of teachers out in the real world, and to accept whatever happens to them because of how their leadership structures either engage them or don't, or pretend to engage them and really don't as such. Because it's hard to be able to teach people how to not only collaborate with each other, but to effectively put them into motion in among a group setting. That's another podcast.
No, and Trish and I've thought about that too. That was like one of our last articles. It ends with this idea of like, how do we help them be advocates, advocacy, because they have all these great ideas about what the change they want to see, but then they're going into schools where that change is not, they don't see that change, or they don't have the power to make that change without tenure and things like that. So that's like on our agenda to talk more about advocacy and how we can incorporate that.
We should talk about that. I have lots of opinions about that. Okay, what is the question I should have asked you, but had not asked you?
Oh.
You're smiling. I told you I was going to ask that question.
No, let's see.
Are we buying a car from you? That was something I probably forgot to ask about.
I feel like we covered a lot. I mean, maybe the thought was like, where does this go next?
Hello.
But we almost talked about this a little bit about our future with this. Now, Trish and I love to collaborate, and we wanted to do project-based learning in another class. So we're going to meet next month to really flesh this out a little bit better, but to include project-based learning in her 6-credit literacy class. And we're like initially thinking about what do teachers of elementary students who are teaching reading need in their future. And we're exploring the idea of like incorporating technology, because I love technology. She's passionate about literacy, about using maybe a book creator type tool to create a book that they could have as a resource as they become a teacher. And we're just brainstorming ideas, but that's like, and that did stem from PBL, but also from this idea of social emotional learning and trying to support our students even after they leave our classrooms.
There's 3 kinds of
Go
ahead, I'm sorry.
No, sorry. I was just going to say we'd like it to be a longitudinal study so that it's something where we do check in with our students, with our alumni once they're working out in the field, and just kind of see what worked with the book. Again, what could be improved, what are their opinions on further enhancing literacy instruction in college and their teacher training, and supporting them when they're working in the field. So, but again, this is all in the works, and we have a 2-hour meeting set up very soon to discuss.
Well, there are 3 kinds of futures, really 4, but 3 kinds of futures, and what's possible. Yeah, most anything is possible. There's what's probable, and there's what's preferable. So really what you're beginning to play with in this meeting, I wish I could be a fly on the wall a month from now, would be what are your preferable futures in terms of I'm not sure this is a good analogy. The DNA you have in your hand that you can maybe use to replicate in other places. That was pretty good. I like the way I said that. I'm going to make a bumper sticker out of that.
That's good.
And with that, I'm going to, unless you have something else that you'd like to finish up this conversation with. So I'll keep you here all day.
This is a little like not necessarily SEL, but I feel like, well, you know what, we could say that differentiation of instruction within itself, addresses SEL because we're really attending to the needs of our students. And the one thing that when we were talking about PBL earlier that I neglected to mention is that project-based learning is also really powerful because it lends itself naturally to differentiation of instruction. So while we have our expectations for our students and we have our rubric, the way that they're able to go about creating the materials on their webpage and so forth, and the creativity that goes in behind it, and how students want to express themselves can vary, student to student. And I just think that that's really powerful to remember that, we know it, but I just have to say it that your assessment can be different, and that's a form of differentiation within itself.
The process drives the product.
Yep, absolutely.
Madeline?
I'm good. Yeah, I think we covered everything. I like that ending though, the process and the product as like our final thoughts.
People will argue with you about that, actually, if you think about it. That's the process drives the product. I think that's really what we tend to forget about in terms from the leadership corner as well as from these straight instructional corner. I don't know why they do, but I think I know why they do, but they don't. Another conversation. I have to thank you so much. Those of you who will watch this video, it'll be up someplace in the middle of August of 23. I always say the same thing to everyone is to please share it. Please share the link when you see it. And without a doubt, make it a point to ask to find a copy of the journal. I'm not sure this is a great picture of it. Find a copy of it in the journal. It is online. If you email me at I forgot my scope. I'll give you my Gmail, rbernardo@gmail.com. I will see to it that you get the link to download it online, as well as the link itself. And with the hope that some of you who are watching this will say, I like to take a wrinkle on what these two professors have offered and maybe look at it from another perspective and submit it to our journal for further consideration. And we can have a panel discussion about it in a preferable future. Okay. All right. With that, I thank you. I really appreciate it. This was it went longer than I thought it would, but not as long as I wanted to. We'll take it from there. Thank you so much.
Thank you.